All right, let's talk the biggest shame in sports. Load management, it's not what you think it is. Some people argue that athletes nowadays are soft, they don't work hard enough, they don't want it badly enough, they're not willing to sacrifice their bodies, which is really interesting. The reason we actually load manage to begin with is not because they're soft, it's because we've been running athletes to the ground for decades. Athletes are suffering stress fractures, tears in connective tissue, career-ending injuries, injuries to tendons that are really hard to heal, way too much. So teams started realizing this and they started to optimize around these things to make sure that the athletes last longer and are able to play in the playoffs, etc. And that is where load management comes in. If it wasn't for this concept, many of these athletes you see today would not last. They would not be able to play. People are not supposed to walk funny after having an elite sports career, a professional sports career. Why is it that their knees are completely degenerated and they're walking with valgus? They got to get hip replacements, knee replacements way too early. These people are the cohort that are supposed to be the most healthy population in the world. I mean, they're doing everything correctly, right? They're eating right, they're sleeping right, they're exercising right. Not really. That is where it comes in. And the people making decisions on these things are not necessarily, interestingly enough, not necessarily educated in this field. Medical staff, they're given advice. Medical staff in most areas of the world are just giving advice and recommending. They don't actually have control over everything that happens. They're just trying to advise you. When this happens, people get mad at the medical staff for not letting players play. But what we're seeing is most likely the human athlete, the competitor, most likely want more than they're able to sustain. That is why injuries probably happen, because you're fighting through pain, you're fighting through perhaps degeneration, tears, tendinosis. It could be a lot of stuff. But in essence, they probably want it more than they're able to understand is efficient for them to even perform optimally. Why is it that if you wait a week and you don't play basketball or any sport for a week, that you can jump the highest that you've ever been able to jump the whole season? It's because you've been working way too hard for way too long and your fatigue has accumulated to the point where you can't generate as much force anymore. Now, this brings us to a very, very important point. The reason this happens is even if we have one game a week, which is not always the case, professional athletes usually play at least 2 games a week in basketball settings. If we would only have one game a week, the coaches are not going to let you rest. Instead, they'll see, oh, we got more time to prepare. Let's practice more. Let's do this more. And in fairness to them, that is the only variable they can control. They're trying to prepare you to the best of their abilities to play and perform, guide you towards a win. And when that doesn't happen, the end result is usually when you're not well prepared, you might be the team that loses. But what ends up missing, and perhaps what the bigger leagues are catching up on, is statistically, if you're not able to run as much as you want to, perform as well as you want to physically, because, measuring the distance that you're actually running in real time or during the games, if those numbers are decreasing because your players are too tired, or if you use the eye test, understanding that they're not hustling as much as they should, you can tell that their fire doesn't last the entire game and they're not able to compete for every possession. This doesn't really make any sense, because we want our athletes to be able to perform at their highest output as much as possible, right? So why is this continuously happening? Well, like I said before, the people that are in positions of power when it comes to decision making in these aspects, they are not medically trained, and they're leveraging 2 things. They need income for the team to be sustained financially, and the coaches also need to prepare as much as possible, because if you lose 1 or 2 games, it's not the players that are getting fired, it's the coaches, unfortunately. So they're trying to maximize their tools and their skill set to be able to prepare you as much as possible. But if that goes overboard, the athletes are going to be run down. So the predicament is that, okay, we got to load manage these athletes to make sure that they're feeling well and they're performing at their optimum. But when we do that, the fans get mad because they want to see their favorite athletes play. And they're also disappointed because they're paying for it. It feels like some of these athletes are playing part-time. Well, guess what? If they don't play part-time, they probably won't last the entire season or as many years as they would want to. We are now prolonging athletes' careers because of load management, because of information, because of understanding. And we're trying to adjust to a variable that is constant, which is the setting. And the setting is, in some leagues, the NBA, 82 games a season in like 6 or 7 months. 82 games in 6 or 7 months. And you're supposed to practice in between that, and you're supposed to do your strength and conditioning. And it doesn't matter how much you sleep. It doesn't matter how well your nutrition is. And the body doesn't sustain that well, and we can tell by the injuries guys suffer. And these are the elite of the elite, right? So these people, the players that are doing this, usually have passed every single parameter and test that they have to pass to even get to this point. These athletes, this cohort, are probably better at playing through injuries or being able to last, and their tissues are probably stronger than your average person would be. So what is the solution? The solution should be that, okay, we don't load these athletes as much, which means that there should be less games, perhaps maximum 2 games a week, less practices, more focus on intensity during those practices, and perhaps having at least 2 days off. You know, Leicester City, the soccer club, football club, they had a very successful season where they had at least 2 days a week of rest, right? Which I find amazing. That is amazing. Your guys are not supposed to come in looking like they can't walk anymore and worrying about if they're going to be able to play with their kids after their careers. These people are supposed to be the best of the best. And even though there are some treatments, that are very special, some people get hormone replacement treatments, you get some treatments that may be some peptides and stuff like that may enhance recovery. It is mostly not allowed in most leagues. So basically, the athletes lose a lot, the fans lose a lot, the organization probably loses a lot too, because they got to pay players that usually wouldn't be able to play at this level for this long if it wasn't for load management, because the schedule is too hectic. Now imagine if every game had more anticipation. Imagine if every game was more important. Fans would enjoy those games probably a lot more, and the intensity would probably rise too. There's a reason why the playoffs are more intense, besides being able to scout only one team and stuff like that. And it's because you probably have had some rest, and you could prepare more to play the opposition, and sometimes you get even 2 days of rest or preparation between games, which is probably why the intensity rises. But during the season, the intensity doesn't rise as much, mostly evident in the NBA. But if you look at Europe, the intensity is as high. They're not playing as athletically. Obviously, the game allows for more physicality, which makes it harder, and the court is smaller and all of those things, which makes it for athletes to be able to do stuff that doesn't require top speeds. Basically, the solution here, in my opinion, would be to decrease the amount of games. If you do happen to be in a situation where you have 1 or 2 games a week, this is for organizations. Don't force the players to have 4 high-load practices, 1 travel day, which becomes your rest day for some reason. And then traveling is not rest. Rest is when you're at your place, being able to recuperate from your intensive workout and not being on a flight. Flying is not recovery. Flying gets you dehydrated, etc., etc. And the cabin pressure is not recovering for your body. That means that athletes have to be able to be put in a position where they can rest more and perhaps give them opportunities to be able to compete more during practices. If the guys are more rested and they haven't been playing as much in that time span, they're probably going to be more psychologically willing to play. The more you water down something, the more you expose their brains to this workload, to this effort, to these points of emphasis, to the focus that is required to play at that high level of energy exertion, both mentally and physically. The more you do it, the less they're going to be able to reproduce it. This means that, hey, we are in a setting where these athletes need to be restrained a little bit so they get their hunger back. The dopaminergic system is not optimized for you to press the button over and over and over again without sacrificing something. The more you go out on the lever of dopamine and motivation, neural energy, and of stuff that makes you move and makes you perform, the more you're going to have to come back on the same spectrum to rest from it. The more you press on that button, the less intense that button is going to be because your body can't produce it. So, all in all, load management happens because there's a problem in the system, and the system is set up for there to be too many games, and if there are not too many games, there are probably too many practices, and you're burning out the resources that these athletes have, both in terms of connective tissue, muscles, and in terms of neural and psychological effects and neurological effects. So the biggest shame in sports is not that we're load managing. It is that we have to load manage because we haven't figured out a better system for these athletes to play in, even though we have the information at hand. It's not like this is rocket science, really. The more you do something of high effort, the less you're going to be able to sustain it. It's not rocket science at all. With all this information we have, with all these tools we have, people are still getting injured, and the teams do not want to lose their key players or any player whatsoever to injuries. You're paying them too much. We're losing too much money for us to be conforming to some ideology that we have to put these athletes through more practices. Instead, we should optimize their practices and have them be more intense, more focused, more precise on what the object is, which is to perform at maximum output, and use that information to our benefit, to our advantage. I am very sure and I am very confident that if we would have less practices, guys would compete much harder, much more intensively, much more diligently, and they would put in more effort into the games, which would bring a lot of intensity, a lot of fun. You don't want to water down a beautiful product such as basketball. You do not want to water down this product. If I would feed you your favorite dish for every meal, every day, you would most likely not enjoy that dish as much as you did before it was fed to you for every meal. Variety. That is what brings purpose. That is what makes athletes go and tick even more. And that's most likely what is going to benefit the whole industry, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Please let me know what your thoughts are on this. I would love to interact and understand more about what the field is thinking. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm working with these athletes on a daily basis, and I want to see them succeed and maximize their potential. But we can't maximize everybody's potential because everybody can't fit into the system. And you're probably going to say, hey, Artin, tough shit. These athletes are just going to have to go through it, right? If you can't make the system, it's not for you. But the reason why more players are extending their careers and playing better is because of the age of information, because the tools we have at hand, and because of medical science. Because the numbers are most likely showing the less we're putting these guys through strenuous activities, the longer they're going to be playing. It'll probably give us more competitive chances. So, yes, I am biased. I hope that we can solve this situation because what we're doing now is quite inefficient. We're trying to load manage because the schedule is too much. It doesn't make sense. And when the schedule isn't too much, we're putting so much psychological pressure on the coaching staff, and we're letting them act on that psychological distress where they tune up practices, the amount of practices, and they won't let the guys rest because they want to prepare more. And it's probably not working to my understanding. So let me know what you're thinking about this, and I'll see you next time.